If you cut off your finger, some people think they should put it in their mouth to keep it wet. But your mouth is filled with bacteria that cause infection. Others think they should put it directly onto ice to preserve it. But the freezing temperatures destroy delicate tissues, making reattachment impossible. And if you try taping it back on yourself, there's no blood flow, so the finger would quickly die. The best thing is to wrap it gently, keep it cool, and rush to a hospital. A man pointed a gun at her. She was shoved into a car, driven away, and tied tightly to a chair. Then she overheard a phone call where her husband told the men to kill her. But they decided not to, and secretly freed her instead while still collecting their money. Returning home days later, she watched as her family left her house mourning her death. Then she surprised her husband, who thought she was dead. Immediately, he begged for forgiveness, but police recorded his confession and now he's serving years in prison. Three friends were exploring the haunted theater, which had been abandoned for years. Locals told stories about unexplained noises and things moving by themselves, claiming the building was haunted. But it was scheduled to be torn down the next day, meaning this was their only chance to explore it. One of them joked about holding a seance. The others laughed until they reached the stage. A bowl of salt, a bird's skull, a blade, and an open book with a drawing of an old woman's twisted face. Then a faint sound came from the rafters. It almost sounded like a woman screaming in fear. Two of the friends laughed and stepped closer, but the third shook his head, saying it felt wrong. They kept urging him, promising that it was just for fun. Finally, he sighed and climbed onto the stage. They stood around the circle and joined hands. The air grew still, but they heard a soft scraping sound. It was the blade. It started to tremble. It scraped across the floor, slowly turning toward them. Then the massive curtain dropped with a heavy crash before the whole stage collapsed. The next morning, the demo crew searched the ruins. No sign of anyone inside, just a crushed skull, a sharp knife, and a book with a drawing. It was three terrified teens, sketched on the page. When the wrecking ball hit, the workers swore they heard screams coming from inside the walls. He hit the chisel, chipping off pieces of the mountain to build the entire tunnel all by himself. At first, villagers laughed, but he returned day after day with just a hammer and a chisel. You see, years earlier, his wife had fallen off a cliff and was badly injured, but the nearest hospital was blocked by the mountain, and the only route went around it, stretching over 40 miles. His wife's injuries were too severe, and she died before they could reach it. So the man swore no one else would suffer the same fate. And for 22 years, he chipped away at solid rock until a passage finally cut through the cliffs. It was as long as a football field and served as a quick route to the hospital, which has saved countless lives. When you flush a public toilet, poop particles float through the air, and when you turn on the hand dryer, they get sucked inside and blasted onto your skin, covering you in poop germs. And once you leave the bathroom, they can be transferred onto everything you touch. Even your face will carry some of those poop particles, meaning you should just use a paper towel to dry your hands.
ഒരു സിപ്പ് ടൈ നിങ്ങളുടെ വിരലിൽ വളരെ മുറുകെ പിടിച്ചാൽ അതിനുള്ളിലെ രക്തക്കുഴലുകൾ മുറുകെ പിടിക്കും. അതുവഴി നിങ്ങളുടെ വിരൽത്തുമ്പിൽ രക്തം കെട്ടിക്കിടക്കുകയും അത് ഒഴുകുന്നത് നിർത്തുകയും ചെയ്യും. ചർമ്മം പെട്ടെന്ന് വീർക്കുകയും ചുവപ്പായി മാറുകയും ചെയ്യും. എന്നാൽ പുതിയ രക്തം വരാത്തതിനാൽ നിങ്ങളുടെ വിരൽത്തുമ്പിൽ ഓക്സിജൻ തീർന്നുപോകും. അതില്ലെങ്കിൽ ഉള്ളിലെ കോശങ്ങൾ പട്ടിണി കിടക്കാൻ തുടങ്ങും. നിങ്ങളുടെ മാംസം ഉടൻ തന്നെ കറുത്തതായി മാറുകയും ഒടുവിൽ പൂർണ്ണമായും അഴുകുകയും ചെയ്യും.
The rat sees the flash of light, and its brain fires with a signal telling it to pick the left lever for water. Tiny electrodes record that signal and send it through wires thousands of miles away into a different rat's brain. Now, this rat never saw the flash of light, but the signals it's receiving make it feel like it should pick the left lever. When it does and finds the water, both rats get a treat. Over time, the two rats rats learned to work together, using a shared brain stretched across continents. He climbed the Colosseum's spiked fence, trying to get the perfect photo. But as he did, he slipped, and the metal spike drove straight into his back. They pierced his spine, leaving him hanging there in agony. For over 20 minutes, he screamed as tourists watched and rescuers tried to reach him. Doctors had to sedate him on the spot before carefully pulling his body free. He needed surgery and more than 80 stitches, and he now faces penalties for tampering with the landmark.
Ha perso metà della mascella. I dottori hanno quindi segato l'osso della gamba, tagliandone una sezione e rimodellandola in base alla curva della mascella. Poi hanno inserito degli impianti dentali, mentre l'osso era ancora attaccato alla gamba, e hanno applicato una serie di denti stampati in 3D personalizzati una volta inseriti nella bocca. I vasi sanguigni della gamba sono stati suturati ai vasi sanguigni del collo, mantenendo in vita la nuova mascella. E delle piccole viti hanno bloccato l'osso in posizione, assicurando ciò che restava della mascella originale.
They rolled the bulldozer onto the driveway, tearing it into chunks, while the homeowners and police begged them to stop. You see, the workers were hired to make a new driveway, and after spending days perfecting it, the homeowners refused to pay them the full amount. So they came back to destroy what they had built. The police were called and tried to calm them down, but still, the workers refused to stop unless they got paid. The homeowners eventually gave in, paying the workers everything they promised, but their driveway was left half destroyed. They set up the camera to keep an eye on their toddler, but he woke up at 2 a.m., screaming and pointing at the camera. At first, his mother thought she was dreaming, but she heard a man's voice softly shushing him through the speaker. Then her husband heard it too. She ran into the toddler's room and froze. She saw the light on the baby monitor was flashing, meaning someone was watching them. You see, the monitor was connected through Wi-Fi, and someone had hacked in just to talk to their son through the camera. The sun hit the building, then bounced off and melted the car below. You see, the building was designed with a curve, and when the sun was at its highest point, it hit the glass at the perfect angle. When it bounced off, it was focused into a concentrated beam, reaching almost 250 degrees on the ground. This was enough to melt cars and burn doormats. It even fried an egg, and it only stopped when shade covers were finally installed.
Son visage heurta un rocher en glissant, se cassant le nez et se blessant à la main et à la jambe. Lorsque les sauveteurs arrivèrent, ils la chargèrent dans une nacelle attachée à un hélicoptère. Mais lorsque l'hélicoptère décolla, les pales poussèrent l'air vers la femme et une corde de sécurité se rompit, la faisant tourner sur elle-même. Elle prit rapidement de la vitesse, vira de bord de manière incontrôlable, et le sang lui monta à la tête et aux yeux. Elle tourna 175 fois sur elle-même en seulement 40 secondes jusqu'à ce qu'il finisse par la tirer à l'intérieur. La femme resta étourdie pendant plusieurs jours et intenta un procès à la ville, remportant près d'un demi-million de dollars.
She stumbled as she got out of bed, and her 220-pound body fell on top of her husband, who was lying on the floor beside the mattress. She slid into the gap between the bed and the wall, wedging him underneath her weight. He tried to push himself free, but the pressure on his chest made it impossible to breathe. His wife screamed while trying to lift herself up, but she couldn't move. Neighbors rushed in and pulled her off, but her husband had already suffocated. Walt Disney took a bite of the hot dog, counted his steps, then tossed the wrapper on the ground, according to the legend. And he watched other guests do the same. When he counted, he found it was about 30 steps before someone would drop their trash. And when he opened Disneyland and installed trash cans, he personally measured out 30 steps between each one. So now, when you walk through a Disney theme park, you'll find a trash can exactly when you need it. The truck slammed into him, breaking his ribs and knocking him into a coma. But when he woke up, he could only speak Mandarin.
发生了什么？
You see, his brain tried to heal the left half by mostly using the right side. And because English mostly uses the left side, while Mandarin uses both, it forced him to speak Mandarin,
我爱你，za ke dianing。
making him remember every single word he learned from high school. Even though he eventually went back to normal, this inspired him to go on a Chinese dating show, where he won a free trip to the Maldives. Inside the bean, a larva smacks its head against the hollow shell, causing it to twitch and jump. Now, they do this when the beans are placed in the hot sun. You see, without movement, the heat could actually cook them alive. But by banging their heads, the larva cause the beans to jerk and roll, eventually bouncing out of the sunlight to escape the heat. They can keep doing this for months as needed, until they finally transform into a moth and crawl out of the shell. The dragon flew above Disney World and a pilot sat inside. Special controls allowed him to move the head, flap the wings, and swing the tail. A giant fan attached to its back pushed it forward, while a paraglider held it up in the sky. Powerful spotlights focused only on the dragon, but the dark glider was hidden against the night sky. And this made it look like a real flying dragon. A hidden cannon even let it spit fire. But after flying over the grand opening, it was put in storage and never seen again.
Observaron cómo los motores del avión se apagaban uno por uno hasta que los 4 se apagaron, dejándolo planeando silenciosamente a 37.000 pies. Verán, una nube de ceniza volcánica había sido lanzada hacia el cielo debido a una erupción. Y como no era una nube normal, no apareció en el radar del avión. Una vez en los motores, el calor la transformó en vidrio. Ese vidrio obstruyó las turbinas y apagó los 4 motores, lo que significó que durante 15 minutos el piloto solo pudo planear mientras el avión caía miles de pies y todos a bordo creían que iban a morir. Pero a medida que el avión descendía, finalmente abandonó la nube y el vidrio comenzó a desprenderse de los motores, lo que permitió a los pilotos reiniciar los 4. La aeronave aterrizó a salvo, salvando todas las vidas a bordo.
Hij bekeek de sleutel van de bewaker en onthield het patroon onmiddellijk. Vervolgens velde hij een stuk schrootmetaal in precies dezelfde vorm en ontsnapte zo uit de gevangenis. Als autistisch kind had hij namelijk een bijzonder talent voor mechanica. Toen zijn vader overleed, liet hij hem zijn gereedschap na, maar zijn stiefmoeder belde de politie omdat het testament nog niet was voorgelezen. Hij werd veroordeeld tot 4 jaar, maar na slechts een maand klom hij over het prikkeldraadhek en rende weg. Dit verlengde zijn straf en betekende eenzame opsluiting. Eenmaal terug in zijn cel gebruikte hij een geïmproviseerde zaag om de tralies door te zagen. Een andere keer maakte hij een geïmproviseerd pistool van een tube tandpasta en richtte het op de gevangenisbewakers terwijl hij rende. Na 13 ontsnappingspogingen liep zijn straf op tot 34 jaar, waarvan 27 jaar in eenzame opsluiting. En ondanks protesten zit hij tot op de dag van vandaag nog steeds vast.
They pulled a live eel out of the man's belly. You see, the man had come in complaining of severe pain. And when doctors pushed on his abdomen, it was rock hard. When they stuck a camera inside, they saw the eel, and it was moving. Now, some say this was part of some strange folk cure, but he never said how it actually got in there. They caught the shark and tied the line to the back of the boat. And as it began to swim, their boat actually started to move. You see, they had been lost at sea for weeks after their GPS failed. They drank salt water, ate raw fish, and fought to stay alive. And when they finally caught the shark, they rigged it up like an engine. And for 3 days, it dragged their boat across the ocean until it finally died. But in the distance, they saw an island. And after 33 days lost at sea, they finally reached land. They hid the poison inside a fake perfume bottle and put it on his door handle to kill him on contact. But the man was quickly taken to the hospital before the poison killed him. So they tossed the bottle into the trash. But months later, a man found it in a donation bin and gave the bottle to his partner. She sprayed it on her wrists and the poison seeped into her skin, eventually shutting down her organs and killing her 8 days later. If you hold a balloon over a candle, the flame will weaken the rubber and it'll pop instantly. But if you fill the balloon with water and lower it over the flame, the heat goes into the water instead of staying in the rubber. Then the water spreads the heat out before it can build up in one spot, acting like a shield around the rubber. This means the rubber never gets hot enough to melt, so the water-filled balloon does not pop. The enemy bullet sliced right through his chin strap, knocking the helmet off his head. They were trapped in trenches just a few hundred feet apart, fighting each other for weeks on end. He had stopped thinking of them as men. They were just targets in the dark. But one day, for some reason, the gunfire stopped. For the first time in weeks, everything was still. In the quiet, he remembered what day it was, Christmas Eve. He lifted a lantern above the trench and began to sing a Christmas song.
Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht.
From across the field, another voice joined in. Then more. Enemy voices on both sides, all singing along. He stood up, climbed out of the trench, and stepped into the battlefield. Slowly, soldiers from both sides started to follow. They met in the middle, shaking hands on the ground right where their fellow soldiers had previously died. Some started sharing chocolate and showing photos of their families. They played football, traded souvenirs, and told each other stories. They even posed for photos together, because for once, they finally saw each other not as enemies, but as fellow men. When dawn broke, the lanterns burned out and orders came down the line. The Christmas truce was over. He returned to his trench, gripping the same rifle, and across the field, the men he had sung with the night before raised their guns too. His plane was shot, and plastic shards from the windshield tore into his eyes. Now, at the hospital, the surgeon noticed something strange. You see, injuries like these usually cause swelling as your body tries to get rid of the foreign objects. But the plastic pieces didn't activate his immune system, meaning they could stay in his body for a long time without any harm. Now he figured if he could put this kind of plastic in someone's eyes, he could replace their damaged lens, curing their blindness. And he eventually invented the first permanent contacts. Now millions of people can see again, all thanks to one pilot's injury. They would yank the blood-sucking creature off the fish, then stab its brain before squeezing out its blood. The blood would be boiled with red wine to make a sauce, while the rest of the lamprey was baked. It was then served to royalty, covered in the blood sauce. And this dish was eaten on Christmas Eve, when Christians weren't allowed to eat meat. You see, lamprey is fatty and meaty, even though it's technically a fish, making it a perfect loophole for rich people who wanted to eat meat when they shouldn't. Alexander the Great's body was sealed inside the tomb, but he may have still been alive. You see, he should have decomposed, but as his body sat for 6 days before the funeral, some say it stayed perfectly preserved. Now, at the time, people thought this meant he was a god, but today, some scientists think he became totally paralyzed before they pronounced him dead, meaning he might not have been dead at all. Instead, he could have suffocated in his tomb, or been cut open and had his organs removed as they embalmed him.
Mereka menarik lukisan itu dari dinding dan menemukan sebuah ruangan tersembunyi. Namun, apa yang mereka lihat di dalamnya membuat mereka ngeri. Begini, beberapa minggu sebelumnya, seorang pria mencoba menelepon saudaranya. Dan ketika orang asing mengangkat telepon, ia langsung tahu ada yang tidak beres. Tetangganya juga melihat orang-orang masuk ke rumah dengan membawa perlengkapan kebersihan, jadi ia menelepon polisi. Mereka masuk dan menemukan banyak gelandangan yang tinggal di rumahnya sebelum mengungkap ruangan rahasia dengan satu akuarium ikan. Di dalamnya terdapat tubuh pria itu tanpa kepala atau tangannya. Polisi menangkap 2 gelandangan, tetapi mereka kemudian dibebaskan. Dan hingga hari ini, tidak ada yang tahu apa yang sebenarnya terjadi.
The shopping mall rose on every side of her small house, leaving it surrounded by concrete walls and cranes. You see, developers had offered her $1 million to sell her house so they could build the mall, but she refused, saying she wouldn't move for any price. So they just built it around her. Soon her house became famous, and fans tattooed it on their skin as a symbol of determination. Now, the project manager stopped by often to check on construction, then just to check on her. They became friends. He brought her groceries and listened to her stories. She told him about spying on Nazis and even meeting Hitler himself. Now, no one knows how much of it was true, but he said her spirit was. And when she finally passed away, she left the house to him.
彼女は桟橋から飛び込んだが、近くのボートのコードが切れて電流が水中に漏れ出し、泳いでいる途中で凍りつき、海に沈みながらゆっくりと死んでいった。船の配線が不完全だと、目に見えない網のように電流が水中に広がる。そして、ほんのわずかなショックでも筋肉や体が麻痺し、すぐに溺れてしまう可能性がある。だから、たとえ安全に見えても、桟橋に停泊しているボートの近くでは決して泳いではいけない。
If you went blind, your brain would stop taking in signals from your eyes. But in rare cases, your brain could just make up images instead. You might think you're pouring into a glass while spilling it across the table, or step forward on what looks like solid ground, only to fall down a flight of stairs. You see, the brain is putting in fake images to fill in the lost connection. Now, no one really knows why it does this, and while the condition is rare, it can be extremely dangerous. His stomach grew into a potbelly over time, so he exercised regularly and didn't drink beer to try and get rid of it. But even after losing 34 pounds, it was still there. Doctors told him it was nothing, but he demanded a full-body scan, and they found a 30-pound tumor wrapped around his kidney. It took 6 hours of surgery to remove it, along with the kidney, but he fully recovered. When you crack your knuckle, the space in between the joint stretches, and this drops the pressure, forming gas bubbles that suddenly pop and make that satisfying crack sound. But the bubbles take about 30 minutes to come back, which is why it's impossible to crack the same knuckle twice in a row. And if you use too much force, you might just press on the wrong spot and dislocate your finger. The bones are carefully removed from the chicken, which is then seasoned and stacked on a duck. Then the duck is rolled up and placed on top of the turkey, and any extra spaces are filled with stuffing. Next, the edges of the turkey are sewn shut, while tightly wrapped strings hold the meat together. It's roasted for several hours at a low temperature to cook evenly, and as it heats up, the fat melts and the flavors combine. Finally, the turducken is carved, revealing the layers of meat inside. If you murder someone and then confess the murder to a priest, they cannot tell anyone, ever. You see, it's called the seal of confession, and breaking it will get you kicked out of the church forever. But what if you confess that you're about to kill the priest's own mother? Well, the priest still has to stay silent. He can't warn her, can't call the police. He can't even sit outside her house to protect her, because any action could reveal what he heard. But what if a priest does break the seal of confession, and then confesses that to another priest? Well, that second priest also can't tell anyone, because now that confession is sealed too. He loaded each of the 24 barrels, added a trail of gunpowder, and aimed it out of the window, waiting to assassinate the king as he passed below. He then lit the gunpowder, which fired all the guns at once. The force blew apart the guns and tore the man's face and hands as the bullets rained down on the villagers, even hitting the king's horse in the neck. But the king was barely scratched on his forehead, and the man was soon captured for his crime. He thought taking a bath would make him sick, so for over 60 years he refused to wash, saying the dirt kept him healthy. Instead, he left his home and dug a shallow hole to sleep in. He ate only roadkill and smoked animal poop out of a pipe. And instead of cutting his hair, he burned it over a fire. Over the years, he became the dirtiest man in the world, until someone finally convinced him to take a bath, and he died shortly after. They would paint white strips onto the ground, adding darker blocks below it and to the sides. And from the top, it would just look like a weird pattern. But from an approaching car's perspective, it looked like real floating blocks. You see, a lot of cars ignore the crosswalk signs and don't slow down, which can lead to dangerous accidents. So cities around the world have started painting these illusions, forcing drivers to slam their brakes and think twice before they speed. If you sliced open a giant cockroach, squeezed inside, and sealed yourself in, could you survive a deadly nuclear fallout? Well, when a nuke explodes, the radiation travels through the air. But as it passes through different materials, it loses concentration, meaning it will eventually run out. Now, cockroaches are mostly made of water, which would quickly block the radiation. And it would only have to be about the size of a minivan to protect you. But the heat from the explosion would still boil the cockroach's blood, roasting you right inside its body. They pulled chunks of flesh from the mummy, then crushed it into a powder. Next, they added tree sap to create a smooth brown cream. The result was a paint called Mummy Brown, and painters used it for flesh tones, and it became incredibly popular. But when the paint makers ran out of mummies, their supply ran low and lost popularity, and eventually they stopped producing the paint. When artists discovered what it was made out of, they were horrified. One famous painter even buried his tube in the garden, out of respect for the dead, according to the legend. If you jumped through one portal, you would fall out from the other one. And if you put them back to back, it would just feel like you're moving through normal space. But what if you pushed one into the other? Well, the portal has to go somewhere. So as it enters the second one, the vanishing end would start coming out of itself again and again. And if you were halfway through it as it went in, it would break you apart until you became a jumbled mess of body parts. The river would push the gates closed, and the angled doors would seal tight from the pressure, making the water rise on one side as it flowed. Now, if you tried to push the gate open again, the pressure would just make it impossible. But small flaps on the bottom of each gate could be opened, allowing water to flow through. And when the river was the same level on each side, the pressure evened out, meaning you could open the gates easily. Now, this ancient design is still used today in the Panama Canal, creating locks between sections of the canal that have different heights. When boats enter, they can be raised or lowered to the height of the next section before continuing their journey. But since these gates are so big, their weight started to destroy the hinges, which is why they were redesigned to be hollow, allowing them to float. As they unzipped the bag, they found the spy's dead body inside. Now, the bag was locked from the outside, and the heat in his apartment was on, even though it was summer, which made his body rot faster. But he didn't have any injuries, and his windows and doors were untouched, meaning no one had broken in. Now, police did find DNA on his hand and spent a year chasing a suspect until they realized it belonged to the scientist who forgot to wear his gloves, and the case was closed without any answers. Stack the white and dark chocolate bars before chopping them into small pieces, and heat milk in a pot on medium heat. Then stir in cocoa powder and a spoonful of sugar. And when it starts to simmer, dump in the chocolate, mixing until it's evenly spread. After that, add a splash of vanilla and a pinch of salt for a deeper flavor. And once everything's mixed, pour it into a mug, topping it off with a candy cane and marshmallows. Finally, blowtorch the marshmallows until they're golden brown to give you the perfect cup of hot chocolate. Water began to pour in from the vents in the elevator, and within seconds, it flooded up to their necks, stopping them from pressing the open button. If they didn't act fast, the water would trap them inside as they slowly drowned. So they stepped onto the railings to keep their heads above the surface, and one person managed to call 911 while another called his roommate. But before rescuers could even arrive, the elevator was almost filled to the ceiling, so the roommate pried the doors open and saved their lives. The wings were attached to the car, and just moments later, it sped forward, lifting into the air. You see, they wanted to make something that could drive to the airport before transforming into a flying car and soaring through the air next to other airplanes. But the wings weren't properly attached, and they also used a big engine that made the car heavier than normal. So a few minutes into the test flight, the wings stopped working and dropped the car from 800 feet in the sky, which killed both inventors and ended their dream of creating a flying car. If you bite into a super hot jawbreaker, you might think it would just crack a little and burn your mouth. But jawbreakers are made of layers of sugar, and as the heat moves into the candy, the outer layers cool down as the inside starts to boil. This builds up extreme amounts of pressure inside. So when you bite down, the surface gets cracked and the pressure is released, blasting the molten sugar everywhere and giving you and your friends severe burns. If you place the boiled egg on top of the bottle with paper burning inside, the fire will heat the air inside the bottle, making it expand, and a little bit will escape, forcing the egg to jump. But once the inside of the bottle cools down again, it will be missing the lost air since the egg is blocking the entrance. This makes the air pressure inside the bottle lower, while the pressure outside is higher, which will start to put force on the egg. And when it gets strong enough, it pushes the egg into the bottle. To get it out, just blow warm air inside to fill the bottle. And when the pressure gets too high, it will push on the egg again, forcing it to pop out in one piece. If you have a lazy eye, you can wear these goggles which show a special version of the game Tetris. Now, your good eye would see only the bricks on the bottom of the screen, while your lazy eye sees only the falling bricks. And this forces your eyes to work together, which strengthens the signals that your brain receives. And by playing for just 1 hour a day for a month, it can actually start to fix your vision.